There's some really good callers who've called in. I want to talk to Tom in the UK. Tom in the UK, you're live with Eric and V. What would you like to talk about today?
Yeah, hi guys. Nice show.
Thanks.
I was just reading. Hi. I was just reading up on the ecosystem, and as a theist, I find it very hard to believe why it's rational to think that this system was a result of randomness. So how do you approach that?
So, can I ask you a question? There's this idea, the argument from personal incredulity, and it's I can't imagine X, therefore, Y is true. My claim is true. Do you think that supports the God belief, or do you mean it more as in you're kind of having trouble understanding how it came about, but you're not actually using that as a proof to show us that God exists? Like, I kind of want to know where your frame of mind is so we know where to go with the conversation.
I don't think it's more of a physical evidence type of proof that God exists. I think it's more of a rational argument to make that if we observe how systems are formed from a human perspective, whether we make cars or aeroplanes or whatever it might be, we understand that there is an intention behind it. There's an intentionality behind it. So when I apply that same reasoning to the natural system, I find no reason why I can't think that it was also intended, right?
Well, so just so I can clarify, if you think that was intended, is there anything in existence that's not intended?
I don't know. I would have to understand what example you'd be using, right? So if I saw something that works together in a systematic form, I wouldn't think it would be irrational to think that there was no intentionality behind it, because why would it work in that certain way if it wasn't intended, right?
Right. I got you. What I'm wondering is, if everything is intended, then how can you tell what's intended versus not? I'm trying to use your definitions. That way, we can meet you where you're at. And so we can take a whole lot of small things, right? Like let's take the water cycle. We have evaporation, rain, and then it gathers, goes back out to bodies of water, and it continues. It's this cycle. And it may seem complex, but each thing individually, we can see that it's a process that just it happens, right? When water molecules heat up to a certain degree, they become a gas, and they go, and it's just, it all travels along, and that's just the way that the physical world works. And so I'm kind of wondering where you think the intentionality is. Where was the design?
The intentionality comes from looking at other systems, right? So when we look at other systems that we have invented, right, and we structure these systems, now we look at a natural system and come to the same conclusion. So it's not a matter of how I know, but it's a matter of why I believe this to be the case.
So let me throw an example then. We're talking about weather, or I brought up weather. I know the intention of an engine for a car is to move the car. What's the intention of a hurricane, or an earthquake, or a volcano blowing?
I don't know. I don't know what the reason is for a hurricane. I am specifically looking at the ecosystem and how the ecosystem works, and coming to a conclusion that this couldn't have, because when I look at the definition of random, it basically says without any method or conscious.
Right. But we don't live in a random universe.
Right. That's important to make a distinction about.
Yeah.
But it depends how we define random, because when I look at the definition, like I just said, it says without any method or conscious. So if you say it's not random, then you're agreeing that there's a conscious behind it.
No. Let me clarify.
Because
gravity exists.
Okay.
Right? I could climb up to the top of my house and jump off the roof, and I can reliably tell you I'm going to fall to the ground. If I lived in a truly random universe, then if I jumped off the roof every once in a while, I wouldn't. But I do.
What definition of random what's your definition of random?
Well,
No, we're not debating whether or not we're using the same word. We're saying that the best understanding of how the universe works does not include the word random. But just because it doesn't include randomness doesn't mean that the only other option is a conscious agent. That's a false dichotomy.
Thank you, P. Yeah.
But I think if we are to understand each other, we have to agree to definitions, right? If we don't agree to definitions, then I don't really see how we could agree with each other.
Okay, so let's apply that. If with your definition of random, right? If you're saying, because you might be building a straw man here, you might be building up a view that we don't actually hold and attacking that. So I want to make sure that we're not doing that. If you do you think that we believe that we live in a random universe the way you use the word random?
Yes, I really do believe so, because and I say this without, it's not my definition, to be very specific, right? It's a definition I find in the dictionary, which says basically random, made, done, or happening without method or conscious decision. Now, as an atheist, you believe that these workings in nature are made, done, happening without consciousness. So
well, you left out a word there. You left out method. It's not an either or situation here. We believe is such a loaded word. The best understanding that we have about nature is that there is a method. It's just a natural one. Having a method doesn't necessarily entail having a conscious agent. So saying it's either both or neither doesn't make sense. You can pick a different worldview there.
But that is my point. How do we get a system without a conscious decision?
Well, I just gave you an example.
What's the example?
The water table. The water
jumping
cycle.
Off the... But how do you know that doesn't have a conscious decision behind it?
Because you can see this natural system in every place along the way, why and how it's doing what it's doing, and there's no person going in and fiddling around with it.
Yeah, I know, but that's because you don't see how it was. Like we don't know how these systems were formed, right?
Actually, we do. We do. When water molecules heat up enough, they move from a liquid to a gas, and it rises. I mean, what part do we not know? Are you saying that maybe God has some set of levers behind the scenes that adjusts gravity and the way molecules work? Is that what you're appealing to? Because if you're just appealing to the world around us, then there's no God necessary. And in fact, there's this story, and I think it's been proven wrong, but gosh, I love it. And it's what was his name? He went to Napoleon and had written a treatise on the heavenly bodies, the planets and stars moving in the sky and charting them. And let's see if I can talk about this long enough until the live chat can tell me the name, because it's just escaping me right now. But Napoleon had seen that in this book, there was no method, no mention of God physically moving them. And Laplace, thank you. And Napoleon said, I see that you've written this amazing book, but where's God? At which point Laplace replies, I see no need of that hypothesis. Right? What's the need for a God to insert himself into the way water works if we can see exactly how it does and why it does?
I know we can see how, but we don't know. Like no one was at the beginning of time, right? We don't know how everything formed. Right?
Hold on. No, hold on. That's I don't need to have been at the beginning of time to study how water works. Try again. Maybe you're asking the wrong question.
No, I'm not asking. I'm not saying that we needed to be at the beginning of time for you to know how water works. I'm saying that we don't know. We don't know how the system began, right?
According to the way, I'm going off of experts who spend their lives studying this. It's been determined that the vast majority of water on the planet got here from meteors and asteroids hitting the planet in its early, during its formation. So far, no God.
When I say system, I'm not trying to isolate water on its own. I'm talking about the system in totality. So
but that's a meaningless phrase until we find something specific to talk about.
I'm just trying to find out why you think it's irrational to believe that there's no mind behind that system.
Sure, because there's none necessary. I step out and I step outside and I see a world that is amazing and complex, and it's amazing and complex largely because this universe that we're in has laws, right? Those laws are what we have used. Hold on a second. Those laws are what we have defined as how we understand the physical universe working. And because of that, the idea of random, throw it out the window. If you think that we think that, throw that out the window. You built a straw man. We don't think that the universe is random that way. We don't. Because, again, like I said, cool. Let me just finish. I'm sorry. I'm not meaning to interrupt. So I just want to, clarify. Again, I can tell you if I jump off my roof, I'm fairly confident I'm going to hit the ground because I don't think that I live in a random universe like that.
Okay. So I never asked you whether it was necessary for there to be a mind. I asked you why you thought it was irrational to think that there was no mind behind it. Or sorry, why do you think it's irrational to think that there is a mind behind it? Sorry.
Because why are you building extra scaffolding on something that stands fine on its own? You're putting a hat on a hat.
But you're still not telling me why it's irrational to think so. You're just telling me what I'm doing.
Because
hold
on. You know what? That is a good distinction. That's a good distinction. Sure.
So can I jump in real quick?
Please.
All right. So Tom, this is kind of where I'm coming from. I'm not a scientist. I haven't studied this. And I grew up being told that the earth was 6,000 years old and that it was created by a god, the Judeo-Christian one, no less. So I was raised in that belief system. I got out of that. I've done some very preliminary research on abiogenesis and evolution and how everything formed, but I'm by no means an expert. But first of all, I trust these experts who have years and years and years of experience doing things I could not imagine doing with math and numbers and shit that I can't even wrap my head around. So on the one hand, I look at the body of evidence that has been constructed there, and to a certain extent, I have to say, okay, if I were to go to school and learn this, I could also figure this out myself. But for now, I'm trusting these experts. So that's the first reason why I don't think it's rational to put a mind in that equation, because as far as the majority of the experts have figured out, it's not necessary. So that's part one. Part two is the idea of Occam's razor, right? Have you heard that term before?
I think I have, yeah, but I'm not too familiar with it.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to what we've already been talking about, which is the idea of keeping an explanation. Let's see if I can get this right. Keeping an explanation as simple as possible without adding on extra stuff. And that's definitely not the actual definition. But in theory, what that means is, can you get to point A to point B in a straight line? That's great. There's no need to add another point up here and go like that, right? And so if we can say, hey, we can get from point A to point B in a straight line, usually that's better than going like this to get to point B.
Damn it, now I've got the damn TikTok in my head.
I totally agree with what you're saying. If something is easy, why take the hard route? But a lot of people...
Well, it's not easy versus hard.
Can I introduce a term here? Assumptions. So the explanation with the fewest assumptions is most often the correct one. Now, I'm not saying that's always the case, but it's a good rule to follow generally. So how many assumptions are being wedged in to each of those? And how do we justify those assumptions? Now, again, you're using some language that I think is really important here, because are you rational in believing what you believe? Maybe. But that doesn't mean that it's true. Right? So you can have every reason.
What is... Yeah. Yeah, I think I called into a show the other week, and I basically, it's how you sort of categorize truth, right? You could have what you know to be true and what you believe to be true. And religion is a belief system. I think that's what a lot of people need to understand. It is a belief system.
Well, I mean, I think we're using a couple more words that need defining, and so I'm going to try and wrangle it back before the conversation goes all over the place. But what I'll say is, I think that you as a person, Tom, I think you are being honest with us and with yourself about what you think. And I think you came to the conclusions using the best tools that you had available. Does that make you rational in believing that? Sure. I just think you might. I want you to have the best tools possible. And I think that if you applied some of these tools that we try and talk about on this show, you may come to some different conclusions. And so it's not whether or not it's rational to believe, because I don't care whether or not it's rational. You could have grown up in a cave and had very, very little told to you. And, based on what you have, it's understandable. Okay, this is why Tom thinks that this guy is purple, because he's never seen the sky, or his definition of the word purple is different. But is it true? Is it true that God exists? And I think that we all agree that that is the important question that we're talking about, right? Not whether or not our definitions are the same, because if we got all that out of the way, the real conversation is whether or not there's that God. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I could go into the reasons why it is a belief system, right? I mean,
I know you can, but because of the nature of this show, we would need to probably split that into a different call. That way we can kind of focus on that, and then maybe have like a thumbnail that has that specific topic, and that way we're not kind of buckshot all over the place.
No problem. I know I've taken a lot of your time.
That's okay. This is a really interesting conversation, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks for calling in.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye.